Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are diving into the story of Kafr el-Hatba. This is a village where the earth itself is basically viewed as pure. We're looking at a legendary piece of land that was forged by time, by raw nature, and by the mighty Nile River. You see, this isn't just about pinpointing a place on a map, it's really about the entire philosophy of land and history. So let's just get right into it.
Right off the bat, this story raises a super profound question. How exactly does a river's current shape the DNA of an entire village? We're going to explore how the actual physical geography of the Nile River didn't just casually draw the borders of this town. It actively engineered the psychological, the cultural, and even the economic traits of the people who live there. It is just a brilliant example of how an environment forges a community's character over generations. To really understand this, we have to rewind and go back to its strategic roots. See, before 1813, this exact geographical footprint wasn't even called Kafr el-Hatba at all. It was known as the Al-Adawi Plateau. Just imagine this. A vast, elevated sanctuary covering something like 560 acres. Caravans of camels and horses would arrive right at sunset, and they'd be greeted by blazing fires and open tents. This was the domain of Sheikh Yusuf al-Adawi. He offered protection and absolute, unconditional hospitality to these weary caravans traveling the really perilous Western Nile Road. It was a true safe haven.
So when did the modern village actually begin? Well, the true birth happened in 1813 during a massive land and cadastral survey known as the Tawfiq Rokli. To officially secure the rights to this land, Sheikh Yusuf stepped forward and paid exactly 10 gold coins to the authorities. His main goal wasn't just owning dirt. It was to preserve his deeply rooted tradition of ultimate hospitality for travelers. And with those 10 gold coins, the village officially came into existence under a brand new name.
And that brings us to the name itself, Kafr el-Hatba. It's derived from the Arabic word for wood or timber, which is hatba, and honestly, the name is brilliantly literal. The village basically sits on this high, incredibly unyielding sedimentary rock. Back in the day, when the Nile used to flood violently from its ancient 7 branches, this rock acted as a brave shield. While the furious waters raged all around, uprooted trees and timber would literally catch on this natural barrier. The village survived as an island, forcing the angry Nile to break its waves right at its feet. It literally caught the wood of the river.
That brilliantly illustrates the sheer physical resilience it took to just live there. Those ancient, weathered foundational structures are actually remnants of how the village had to adapt. During those terrifying historical floods, the land wasn't just a single rock. The area was naturally divided by 2 distinct cuts, known historically as al-Makata. These cuts acted almost like medieval moats that filled up with dense vegetation and water. It totally solidified the village's reputation as an impenetrable fortress of land. It was, quite literally, a place born from surviving the elements.
Okay, let's fast forward a bit. As the decades passed, the Al-Adawi Plateau rapidly modernized. After that official naming in 1813, major infrastructure eventually made its way there. By 1886, we see the construction of the Damietta-Talca Railway, along with the digging of parallel canals. Now this is a massive turning point. Why? Because these giant projects drew a huge influx of workers and families from all over the country, from the south, the lakes, you name it, and it forever changed the demographic makeup of the village. And you know, this sudden influx of outsiders arriving via the river actually birthed an incredible piece of local folklore. The saying goes, so-and-so came on a banana. Now I know that sounds completely absurd, but it's actually historically factual. During massive floods, the surging waves would uproot entire banana trees from the distant riverbanks. Desperate flood survivors would cling to these floating banana trees, using them as makeshift life rafts. Eventually, the river's current would wash them up safely right onto Kafr el-Hatba's natural rock barrier, where the locals would take them in so they could start a brand new life.
Hold on to that idea of the river's current for a second, because it perfectly illustrates our core question about geography shaping DNA. On the village side of the Nile, the water current was incredibly fast, turbulent, and rough. But if you looked over to the opposite bank, the current was notoriously slow and peaceful.
So here is the crucial point. This physical reality completely dictated the town's entire economy. Because the fish naturally gathered and bred in the slower, calmer currents across the river, the residents of Kafr el-Hatba couldn't easily rely on fishing to survive. Instead, they had to adapt. They became merchants, businessmen, and traders. Meanwhile, the people on the opposite bank naturally became the fishermen. The river's flow literally decided their professions and shaped their daily lives. Isn't that wild?
Now, generations of this intense survival, of hosting travelers, and of fighting the mighty river,
It forged something very specific in the minds of the people. It created a culture of absolute loyalty. The source material shares a really striking anecdote that captures this perfectly. It tells the story of a highly respected local man sitting in a gathering. Suddenly a stranger, an outsider, comes in and starts complaining about a specific man from the village, calling him a scammer and just hurling insults at him.
Now, look at how the local man reacted based on their deep-seated code of honor. He grew red in the face and immediately stopped the stranger. He calmly explained that, as a guest, the stranger was entitled to ultimate hospitality and respect. In fact, the local man said he would happily pay the scammer's debt right out of his own pocket right then and there to resolve the issue. But, and this is a big but, allowing an outsider to curse a son of the village in his absence? No way. That was a red line. That was a violation of their deepest cultural code. To them, the dignity of the village entirely outranks the personal flaws of the individual.
You can actually feel that same fierce loyalty today. The dense, deeply interconnected modern architecture of Kafr el-Hatba literally hugs the Nile, reflecting that tight-knit community. Interestingly, the source narrative uses this cultural unity to draw a really sharp contrast. It impartially highlights the deeply rooted, traditional locals who serve the town daily, and contrasts them against visiting politicians, who are referred to metaphorically in the text as strangers in blue robes. According to the local sentiment, these outsiders supposedly only appeared during election seasons to make noise and exploit the village's resources. Impartially analyzing this traditional sentiment from our source, it is abundantly clear that the community holds a very firm belief about its destiny. The prevailing sentiment is that the future prosperity of the village relies entirely on remaining in the hands of its devoted, deeply rooted offspring. They place a massive emphasis on the need for clean hands and a pure history, firmly rejecting anyone who merely uses the land for temporary gain.
And that brings us to our final thought for today. As the river continues its endless, unstoppable flow, will the deeply rooted DNA of Kafr el-Hatba withstand the modern tides of change? We'll leave you to ponder this. If a river can forge the honor, the economy, and the very soul of a people over 2 turbulent centuries, what will the next century build upon that resilient rock? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning how the world around you shapes exactly who you are.